Episode 4 of Tartarian Christianity, and when we left off, the Tartarians had just taken over the city of Baldach, which is the new Babylon. And the city of Baldach seems to line up perfectly with the Babylon of Revelation 17, 18, and 19. And the city of Baldach was taken in the year 1258. So before we move on to Kublai Khan, the 5th emperor of the Tartarians, I just want to cover two quick finds surrounding the city of Baldach, because I had tried to find it on a map. Here's Urbano Monet's Flat Earth map. And if we go down to Israel and the Gulf of Persia, and then we follow the river up here, we'll find Babylon. And one of these might be Baldach. It looks like here's a Bagdach and a Bolach. So one of these, probably this one, Baldach, but it has a G in it for some reason. This is likely the city of Baldach. It's right next to Babylon. And looking at the current map of Babylon, we could see it's roughly in the right area. This is ancient Babylon, and so we've got the Persian Gulf, and from there is it's quite a small river now, but there is a river that goes all the way up and right next to the city of ancient Babylon. Here's the ancient Babylon monument that they've built, and the river of and a river right next to it, which of course leads down to the Persian Gulf. So it's likely that this ancient Babylon is the correct area, and that the river came down here into the Persian Gulf. The same thing we can see here, the Persian Gulf and the river running up, which leads right to Babylon. And I didn't realize in Marco Polo's book he had a chapter also on the capture and the death of the king of Baldach and the miraculous removal of a mountain. And this story covers what we've known previously. 1255, they attacked the city of Baldach, and they killed the king, and gave him orders to be shut up in the tower without sustenance. And there in the midst of his wealth, he finished a miserable existence. And I judge that our Lord Jesus Christ herein thought proper to avenge the wrongs of his faithful Christians, so abhorred by this king. From the time he had become the king in 1225, he had persecuted the Christians and even putting them to death. And it seems like he studied the Bible, where it says, if you have the faith of a mustard seed, you shall say unto a mountain, remove hence to a different place, and it shall move. And he rejoiced at this discovery because he was persuaded that it was utterly impossible. And so he gave orders for the Christians to be assembled, and he asked them if they believed whether that this text of the gospel was true or not. And they said yes, it was true. And he said, then if it's true, then give me proof of this, for certainly there's not even one among you who possess even such a small portion of faith in the Lord as to be equal to the grain of mustard. And therefore I'll give you 10 days, and through the power and prayer to Jesus, you've got to move this mountain that's right before you. And if you can't do it, then you're going to suffer the most cruel of deaths. So upon hearing these words, the Christians trembled for their lives, but nonetheless having confidence in their Redeemer that he would deliver them from their peril. So they laid down night and day on the earth, shedding tears profusely, and doing nothing except praying to the Lord. And when they did this for 8 days, a divine revelation came in a dream, directing them to a certain shoemaker who only had one eye. And this shoemaker was the only person capable of moving the mountain through divine grace. And when they found the shoemaker, he said that he didn't feel worthy of the undertaking, but he agreed to do it to help out the poor, terrified Christians. And it should be understood that he was a man of strict morals and devout conversation, having his mind pure and faithful to his God, fervent in his works of charity and rigid in the observance of fasts. It once happened to him that a beautiful young woman who came into his shop in order to have her shoes fitted, and preceding her foot, accidentally exposed a part of her leg, the beauty of which excited him momentarily, But recollecting himself, he presently dismissed her, and calling to mind the words of the gospel where it said, "If thine eye offend thee, pluck it out and cast it from thee, for it is better to enter the kingdom of God with one eye than having two eyes and to be cast into the hellfire." He immediately, with an instrument of his trade, scooped out his right eye, evidencing by the act beyond all doubt the excellence of his faith. So I guess it's the 10th day probably, and a divine service was performed, and they put up a holy cross in front of the mountain. And the king of Baldach, sure that it was a vain ceremony on the part of the Christian, chose to be present, accompanied by a number of his guards for the purpose of killing them in the event of the failure. And here the shoemaker, kneeling before the cross, lifted up his hands to heaven, seeking his Creator that he would compassionately look down upon earth for the glory and excellence of his name, as well as for the support and the confirmation of the Christian faith, that God would lend assistance to his people in the accomplishment of the task imposed before them and manifest his power. Having concluded his prayer, he cried in a loud voice, "In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, I command thee, O mountain, to remove you thyself." And upon these words being uttered, the mountain moved, and the earth at the same time trembled in a wonderful and alarming manner. The king and all of his guards and everybody who was there was struck with terror and remained in a state of stupefaction. Many later became Christians. Even the king secretly embraced Christianity, always wearing a cross concealed under his garment, which after his death was found upon him, and on this account it was that they did not put him in a tomb in the shrine of his predecessors. So it sounds as though when this king of Baldach died, and he was locked up in a tower and only given golden pearls to eat, after they found his body, it sounds as though concealed underneath of his garment, they found a Christian cross, even though he was teaching Islam. Okay, so now that we've covered a little bit more history on the city of Baldach, and it sounds like there was a literal moving of a mountain at that location. And I don't know if there's any connections between that story and the book of Revelation, but we should note that under the reign of the king of Baldach, and it seems as though this is his name, Mostasim Bela, and according to this, his reign began in 1242, but he was put to death in 1258, which is the year the city of Baldach was taken. So just to put a name to this king that we've been talking about, and I don't know if there's any connection to the book of Revelation, but we can see that the Christians are being persecuted by this king of Baldach. He is putting Christians to death. And in one case of Christian persecution, he tells them that they have to move a mountain, and he gives them 10 days. And the church of Smyrna is prosecuted. The angel says, "Do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. I tell you, the devil will put you in prison and test you, and you will suffer persecution for 10 days. Be faithful even to the point of death, and I will give you life as your victor's crown." And man, what a pretty close match that these Christians suffer persecution for 10 days, right up to the point of death. But God says, "Be faithful, and I will give you life as your victor's crown." And the king of Baldach, Mostam Bela, which seems to have what Revelation would call a synagogue of Satan, is persecuting Christians and putting them to death. And when he captures them, he gives them a test in which they must move a mountain, and he gives them 10 days to get it done. Well, that's a pretty good match for the Christians who, according to Marco Polo, were tested that they move a mountain. And it appears here that, according to this historical account of Marco Polo, they were successful. So before this turns into a complete series on the city of Baldach, let's push forward and see what comes next with Kublai Khan, who's the 5th emperor of the Tartarians. And what had just happened was Halu Khan, one of the descendants of Genghis Khan, who was the king of Tartaria, was just about to take Jerusalem and free the Holy Land from the pagans so that he could restore it to the Christians. But he was brought news that his brother Mango Khan had passed away, and Tartaria needed a successor. So Halun could no longer go into Jerusalem in person, so he left 10,000 Tartars to keep the kingdom of Syria under the command of a captain called Abaga. Now, Abaga is a descendant of the wise men, the three wise men who brought presents to baby Jesus when he was born. Abaga is of the family line of the three kings that came to worship the nativity of Christ. So this guy is a literal descendant of the three wise men, and we know, of course, at this point that the three wise men were all Tartarians who went and seen baby Jesus. So Tartarian Captain Abaga was left on the doorstep of Israel and Jerusalem right here in Syria because the Tartarians have already conquered Iraq, Babylon, Iran, and Castle Tigado, and Turkey. They're friends with Armenia, who are also a Christian nation. So basically all of this area is Tartarian land at this point. Of course, northern Asia, all the northern land is all Tartary. But they've now taken Lower Asia and are in Syria on the doorstep of Jerusalem, getting ready to take back the Holy Land. Of course, Halun has now had to head north back up into Tartaria to take the Tartarian crown as Mango Khan has passed away. But while Halun was headed north, he heard that the nobles and princes had placed his brother Kublai Khan in the imperial seat of the Tartars. And he heard this while he was at Taurus. And he understood that Barkat, or Barcha, was marching with a great army with the purpose of making himself the emperor. Halun therefore assembled his people and met with his enemies, the enemies of Barcha, on a certain river which was frozen, and they began a great battle. But the ice being broken by the great multitude of horses and men, there was drowned on one side and the other 30,000 Tartars, insomuch that the armies on each side returned. So you've got Tartarians fighting Tartarians. It is Halun's army against Barcha's army. Of course, they're both Tartarians. But Abaga, who Halun had left in the kingdom of Syria and loved Christians well, he was of the progeny of the three kings who went to worship the nativity of the Lord. And he had labored earnestly to get the Holy Land again under the power of the Christians. But the devil sowed some seed and a scandal and discord between him and the Christians of those parts. And it happened in this manner. In the land of Belfort, there was a lot of towns and villages inhabited by Muslims. And they paid tribute to the Tartars. And some Christians from Sidon and Belfort made off with a bunch of spoils by killing a great number of Muslims and carrying away captive with a great drove of cattle. A nephew of Abaga, remaining thereabout, followed speedily after those Christians that had committed those outrages to tell them on behalf of his uncle that they should dismiss their booty. So Abaga, who is of the family of the three wise men who went to see baby Jesus, his nephew had seen these Christians killing the Muslims and stealing their cattle. And he went and told them that they need to dismiss their booty and essentially stop doing their evil crimes. But some of them, unwilling to part with their prey they had taken, ran upon him and killed him with a bunch of other Tartarians that accompanied him. Abaga then heard that the Christians had slain his nephew, and he presently took the city of Sidon, dismantled the walls thereof, and slew a few of the Christians, the rest saving themselves on an island. And after this, the Tartars would not trust the Christians of Syria, and neither would the Christians of Syria put their confidence in the Tartars, whom afterwards were driven out of the kingdom of Syria by Muslims, as shall be declared. So while this was going on, Halun was busy in war with Barkat, the guy who had a great army and was trying to make himself emperor of Tartaria. So Halun couldn't help out Abaga, and while this was going on, the king of Egypt assembled an army and came to Palestine and joined the battle with Abaga and his Tartars. And Abaga was slain. And I thought I'd pull Palestine up on the map real quick, so I did a search for it on Google Maps. And it takes me to the middle of the ocean over here. And it says that Palestine officially recognized as the state of Palestine. Okay, so this is the right mark, and no joke, Google Earth has Palestine underneath of the ocean. I wonder who at Google and what nation they might be from decided to put Palestine in the middle of the ocean. That's really strange. Let me search for the state of Palestine. Same thing. It's Google Earth has it in the middle of the ocean. Isn't that strange? They want those guys buried underwater and their continent lost in history. There's a certain people with the 4 letters. It starts with the J, and they are the tribes of Benjamin and Judah. They would want Palestine over here. So strange that Google Maps has Palestine literally in the ocean underwater now. Funny when Wikipedia is more accurate than Google Earth, but Wikipedia shows where the state of Palestine is. It's this green area and this green area, which we could see in these red zones. So these red zones are Palestine. It's hard to say exactly where this battle is going on in the province of Palestina, but it's certainly somewhere very close to the Holy Land. And the Egyptian army has come up to fight with Abaga, and they've killed Abaga somewhere around Syria or Palestine, somewhere in this area. And the Tartars, Abaga was slain, and his army was defeated. The Tartars escaped and went into Armenia. By this means, the kingdom of Syria was wholly subdued by Muslims. So the Tartars have escaped, left Syria and gone into Armenia. And Syria, although they were just on the doorstep of the Holy Land, they've been driven back by the Muslims to Armenia. Now, when Halun understood that the king of Egypt had invaded Syria and had driven out his people, he gathered his army and sent for the king of Armenia and the king of Georgia and some other Christians of the east to prepare themselves against the king of Egypt and the Muslims. And when his army was ready, a sickness seized him, and he languished the space of a fortnight and then died, by whose death the enterprise of the Holy Land had an end. So now Halun has died from a sickness. And the war to the enterprise to take back the Holy Land from the hands of the pagans has come to an end. And the Emperor of Tartaria, who was temporarily holding the throne, Kublai Khan, had been taken care of Halun's son named Abaga. So once Halun had died, Kublai Khan went ahead and gave the throne to Abaga Khan, and his reign began in the year of our Lord 1264. Now Kublai Khan was the 5th emperor of the Tartarians, and he inherited the throne when Mango Khan passed away. The honorable heir to the throne was Abaga, but Abaga was busy in war and never made it back to Tartaria to accept the throne. So the 4th emperor was Mango Khan, the 5th emperor was Kublai Khan. Now, when Marco Polo was in Tartaria, Kublai Khan, or Kublai Khan, was the emperor who was reigning. So Book 2 starts off with describing that. The Admiral deeds of Kublai Khan, or Kublai Khan, the emperor now reigning. So Kublai Khan, it is to be understood, is the lineal and legitimate descendant of Genghis Khan, the 1st emperor, and the rightful sovereign of the Tartars. He is the 6th Grand Khan, and began his reign in the year 1256. So Kublai Khan, or Kublai Khan, reigned from 1256 until 1264, so 8 years total, when he passed the throne to Abaga Khan. Now, earlier in the series, we were looking at Revelation chapter 19, where it talks about the armies of heaven riding on white horses and dressed in fine linen, white and clean. Well, the Tartarians wore fine linen, white and clean, and they rode on horses. And what seems to perhaps be talking about Genghis Khan, it says he will rule with an iron scepter, and he will tread the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God Almighty. On his robe and on his thigh is written the name King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Quite interesting to note that Khan means Khan of Khans or Lord of Lords. So King of Kings or Lord of Lords, isn't that an exact match for Revelation 19, King of Kings and Lord of Lords? It's the same exact thing. I wonder if it's written on his robe. I found mention here that his name is written in gold letters and laid up in the temples of the metropolitan city, but it didn't say anywhere here that it's necessarily written on his robe or written on his thigh. But quite interesting that Khan, K-A-A-N, means Khan of Khans or Lord of Lords, King of Kings or Lord of Lords, and that's the exact words of what we find in Revelation. So once Halun had died, Kublai Khan went ahead and gave the throne to Abaga Khan, and his reign began in the year of our Lord 1264. So it's 1264. Halun has died. His brother Kublai Khan, who was temporarily in the throne, has passed the Tartarian crown to Abaga Khan. And Abaga Khan is now the King of Tartaria. So the new King of Tartaria of 1264, Abaga, was wise and governed prosperously in all things, with two exceptions. He would not be a Christian as his father was, and he worshipped idols and believed in idolatrous priests. And he was also always in war with his neighbors, and so by this the power of the Muslims increased much, and the Christians lost the city of Antioch and diverse other places of strength which they held in the kingdom. And the Muslims thereby wasted and spoiled all of the kingdom of Armenia and carried infinite riches there, to the great damage of the Christians, and the power of the enemy was much increased, and the kingdom of Armenia weakened wondrously. And the king of Armenia asked the Tartarian king Abaga if he could help him overthrow the faithless Muslims to the relief of the Christians, but Abaga refused because he was in daily battles with his neighbors. So this change in Tartarians from being a Christian nation bent on conquering the Holy Land and getting it back into the hands of the Christians seems to be starting with Genghis Khan and the White Horse riding out and conquer, bent on conquest. And it's possible that this change, where they have now turned their back on God and the king is not a Christian and he's really just helping the Muslims out, this may be the second seal where another horse comes out, a fiery red one, and its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make people kill each other. And to him was given a large sword. So maybe this is the second seal being opened. And the king of Armenia has passed away, and he's given the kingdom to his son Livon. And this new king of Armenia was wise and governed his kingdom providently, and was loved much by his own people and by the Tartars. And he labored earnestly to destroy the Muslims. And in time, Abaga made peace with all his neighbors, which he had been enemies for a long time. So it sounds like now the Tartarian king Abaga has made peace with the king of Armenia, Livon, and the king of Egypt entered the kingdom of Turkey and slew many of the Tartars and drove them out of many towns. And a Muslim called Parvana, being captain over the Tartars that were in Turkey, rebelled against Abaga and sought the destruction of the Tartarians. So the Tartarians currently have Turkey. And of course, this is where the 7 churches of Revelation are at. And going to older maps, the country of Turkey looks a bit smaller. Here's Cairo, Egypt. So the Holy Land would be right here. We can see Pergamum. I wasn't able to find all of the 7 churches, but definitely Pergamum here. This area is owned by Tartarians, and the Tartarian captain here has turned his back and betrayed the king. And he's decided that he wants to destroy the Tartarians. Captain Parvana rebelled against Abaga, seeking the destruction of the Tartarians. Abaga, hearing thereof, posted so speedily that in 15 days he rode 40 days' journey. And the king of Egypt, hearing of his coming, departed suddenly, not daring to stay any longer. But he wasn't fast enough to get away, so the Tartars, following swiftly, overtook his army and the entirety of the kingdom of Egypt in a place called Pas Blanque. There the Tartarians, rushing onto them, took 2,000 horsemen of the Muslims, besides much riches, 5,000 of the people who lived in the country. And then Abaga came to the edges of Egypt and was persuaded he couldn't go any further because of the heat. The land was too hot, and his Tartars, having their beasts come speedily from far, could hardly endure the heat. They're not on camels or anything. They're on some northern horses who can't stand the heat. So by this reason, they returned into Turkey and spoiled and wasted all the countries that had rebelled and that had yielded to the king of Egypt. But he caused that traitor Parvana and his partakers to be cut asunder in the midst after the Tartarian manner, and a part of his flesh to be served in all his meats, whereas he and his captains did eat. Such was the revenge of King Abaga on the traitor Parvana. Now, King Abaga isn't necessarily a Christian king. In fact, he's been helping the Muslims the majority of his reign, until just recently when he's made a friendship with the king of Armenia. And he's now taken a fight against the Muslims and the king of Egypt. But he is here, of course, engaged in cannibalism, eating a part of the flesh. It seems like one of the worst things you could do to a traitor is cut him up the way the Tartarians cut him up and then serve them in their meats, whereas the captains and the king Abaga did eat. And there's a couple mentions of flesh eating in Revelations, and we had mentioned this earlier in the series, but the Babylon, when Babylon was overtaken, it says the beast and the 10 horns of the 10 tribes of Israel hate the city of Babylon. They will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. So this part where it says that they will eat her flesh is very, that is what the Tartarians do when they take over, at least a bad guy like Parvana. They kill him and they eat their flesh. Just above that, Revelations 19:17, I saw an angel standing in the sun who cried in a loud voice to all the birds flying in the midair, "Come, gather together for a great supper of God, so that you may eat the flesh of kings, generals." So, here it looks like he's talking to the birds, but he is telling them that you're going to eat the flesh of kings and generals. It just seems that the person, John, who wrote Revelation, was familiar with the eating of flesh of, a king or a general when they're killed by an opposing army. Now, this traitor Parvana seems to be a certain chief named Nayan, who, although only 30 years of age, was kinsman to Kublai, and had succeeded to the dominion of many cities and provinces, which enabled him to bring into the field an army of 400,000 horse. Because of youthful vanity and finding himself at the head of such a great force, he formed in the year 1286 an army usurping the sovereignty, or he's a Tartarian kinsman of Kublai who has turned against the other Tartarians. Having formed his army, the Grand Khan proceeded towards the territory of Nayan and continued day and night, and he reached it in 25 days, so prudently that neither the prince himself, Nayan, nor any of his dependents are aware of it, and all the roads being guarded in such a manner that no persons who attempted to pass could escape being made prisoners. So they surrounded the whole city, and they couldn't even escape if they wanted to. At that point, Kublai halted his troops and allowed them to rest for 2 days. And confident, therefore, of their success, they ascended the hill the next morning and presented themselves before the army of Nayan, which they found negligently posted without advanced parties or scouts, while the chief himself was asleep in his tent, accompanied by one of his wives. But here comes Kublai Khan in a large wooden castle borne on the backs of 4 elephants, whose bodies were protected with coverings of thick leather hardened by fire, over which they housed cloth of gold. which is a white linen cloth with gold entwined in it. The castle contained many crossbowmen and archers, and at the top of it was hoist the imperial standard adorned with representations of the sun and the moon. His army consisted of 30 battalions of horse. Each battalion had 10,000 men armed with bows. So 30 multiplied by 10,000, so there's 300,000 men, which form the left and right wings, and they outflanked the army of the Nyan. In front of each battalion of horse was placed 500 infantry. So once again, we could do 500 times 30, and there's another 15,000 men in front of there with short lances and swords. And this was the only historical picture I could find of this. Now, this is an engraving from 1837. So this is just somebody who had read about Kublai Khan and the 4-elephant war castle. And he, drew what he thought it looked like. So he certainly wasn't there. And when I read of the 4-elephant war castle, it sounded to me like 4 elephants in a square arrangement, rather than 4 of them lined up linearly. But, I imagine 1, 2, 3, 4 in a square shape, and then a big castle in the middle of those 4 elephants. And I'll bet it was a lot bigger than this. This makes it look almost somewhat small. But when it's talking about a large wooden castle borne on the backs of 4 elephants, this thing sounds pretty crazy. And they had an infinite number of wind instruments of various kinds that were sounded, succeeded by songs according to the customs of the Tartars before they engage in a fight, which commences upon the signal given by the cymbals and drums. And there was such a beating of the cymbals and drums and such a singing that it was wonderful to hear. I think that Marco Polo was present for this. This signal, by the orders of the Grand Khan, was given to the right and the left wings, and then a fierce and bloody conflict began, and the air was instantly filled with a cloud of arrows that poured down on every side. Vast numbers of men and horses were seen falling to the ground, and the loud cries of the shouts of men, together with the noises of the horses and the weapons, were such to inspire terror in those who heard them. When the arrows had been discharged, the hostile parties engaged in close combat with their lances, swords, and maces shod with iron. Such was the slaughter, so large were the heaps of carcasses of men, and more especially of horses on the field, that it became impossible for one party to advance upon the other. Thus the fortune of the day remained for a long time undecided, and victory wavered between the contending parties from morning to till noon. At length, however, Nyan perceived that he was nearly surrounded, attempted to save himself by flight, but was presently made prisoner and conducted to the presence of Kublai, who gave orders for his being put to death. And his execution was carried out by placing him between 2 carpets which were violently shaken until the spirit had departed from the body. The motive for this particular sentence being that the son and heir should not witness the shedding of blood of one who belonged to the imperial family. Nyan had privately undergone a ceremony of baptism, but never had made an open profession of Christianity, but thought proper on this occasion to bear a sign of a cross in his banners. And in his army was a vast number of Christians who were left among the slain. Now, when the Jews and the Muslims heard that a banner with the cross of Christ had been overthrown, they taunted the Christian inhabitants, saying, "Behold the state of which your banners and your people have been reduced." And the Christians complained to the Grand Khan, who said if the cross of Christ did not prove advantageous to the party of Nyan, then they were rebels and were traitors to the Lord, and they could not afford his protection. After this victory, the Grand Khan returned to the capital city of Kambalu, and he continued to reside there in the months of February and March, in the latter which was the festival of Easter. And being aware that this was one of our principal solemn days, he commanded all the Christians to attend him and to bring with them their book, which contains the 4 Gospels of the evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And after causing it to be repeatedly perfumed with incense in a ceremonious manner, he devoutly kissed it, and directed that the same should be done by all his nobles who were present. This was his usual practice upon each of the principal Christian festivals, such as Easter and Christmas, and he observed the same at the festivals of the Muslims, Jews, and idolaters. Upon being asked about this conduct, he said there are 4 great prophets who are reverenced and worshipped by different classes of mankind. The Christians regard Jesus Christ as God, the Saccharans Muhammad, the Jews Moses, and the idolaters Sogomambar Khan. And this is probably corrupted by transcribers, and it's probably Buddha or Fo, who amongst the Mongols in India is commonly called Shakyamuni, and in Siam Somona Kondom. So Christians for Jesus, Muslims for Muhammad, Jews for Moses, and Buddhists for Buddha. But who knows, this could also be the Satan worshippers and some name for Satyanaka. I do honor and show respect to all the four, and invoke to my aid whichever among them is truth supreme in heaven. But from the manner in which His Majesty acted towards them, it is evident that he regarded the faith of the Christians as the truest and the best. By no means, however, he would permit them to bear a cross before them, because it is exalting the means by which Christ was put to death. So he didn't want anybody, wearing a cross around their neck or showing a cross anywhere, because it was, in a way, glorifying the death of Jesus Christ. It may be perhaps asked by some why, if he showed such a presence to the faith of Christ, did he not conform to it and become a Christian, and his reason for not doing so. Wherefore, he said, why should I become a Christian? You yourselves must perceive that Christians of these countries are ignorant, ineffective persons, and do not possess the faculty of performing anything miraculous. Whereas you can see that the idolaters can do whatever they will. When I sit at a table, the cups that were in the middle of the hall come to me filled with wine and other beverages, spontaneously and without being touched by human hand, and I drink from them. So this guy definitely is witnessing some miracles of cups being filled up with wine in some supernatural manner. But he's saying that the idolaters do that. So that's why I say when he says the idolaters are Buddhists, I'm not sure they're Buddhists, because this sounds more like Satan worshippers and some kind of Satyanaka or being from the evil side of the spirit world. Now, on the note of cups being filled up or beverage being supplied supernaturally, I will say I personally know a Christian pastor who was previously worshiping Satan, and he said that at one point he demanded that a demon bring him a 12-pack of Coke, and all of a sudden a 12-pack of Coke appeared on the kitchen counter. So it's interesting that there's even Jesus turning water into wine, and there's some kind of recurring theme with these beings of the spirit realm miraculously providing drink even to this day with a 12-pack of Coke. Now, in addition to supernaturally filling cups with wine, they also have the power of controlling bad weather and obliging it to retire to any quarter of the heavens. And you are also witnesses that their idols have the ability to speak and predict to them whatever is required. So these evil idols, which I don't think is Buddha, I don't think a statue of Buddha is speaking. That sounds more like, some kind of a golden cow or something like that. But he says, should I become a convert to the faith of Christ and profess myself a Christian, the nobles of my court and other persons who do not incline to that religion will ask me what sufficient motives have caused me to receive baptism and embrace Christianity. What extraordinary powers, do they say? What miracles have been displayed by its ministers? While the idolaters, by means of their profound art, witchcraft, can effect such wonders, may without difficulty compass my death. So he's saying, the idolaters can cast a spell or do some witchcraft to kill me. And the Christians say that they themselves are endowed with the similar art, but which they refrain from exercising because it is derived from the agency of evil spirits. So they know that, this type of witchcraft does come from evil spirits. And he basically says, send 100 persons well skilled in Christianity who can confront the idolaters and show that they have more power than them. And when I'm witness of this, then I'll allow myself to be baptized, and following my example, all my nobility will in like manner receive baptism, and this will be imitated by all my subjects in general, so that Christians of these parts will exceed in number those who inhabit your own country. The Grand Khan appoints 12 of his most intelligent among his nobles, just like Jesus Christ had 12 disciples. Now this is where it gets a little interesting. It's describing the great and admirable palace of the Grand Khan near the city of Kambalu, which is in the northeastern extremity of the province of Cathay. Now this city seems to be right here, Kambalu, Cathay, a metropolis with a habit of 28 million. That would be this big red city right here. So that looks about the middle of Cathay, but it says in the northeastern. Here is Cathay and, of course, Arzareth, where the 10 tribes of Israel were sent. And of the original 10 tribes, they didn't go very far to get to the city of Kambalu. Here is Kambalu on this map. And, of course, it's very, very close to Arzareth. Kambalu, metropolis with a habitat of 28 million. At first I thought it was 2.8 million, but it says 28 million, both on this map and on this one. Now, to give a frame of reference, here are the largest cities in the world right now. Tokyo, Japan is number 1 with 37 million. And number 2 is Delhi, India with 28 million. Seoul, South Korea has 25 million, so that's not as big as Kambalu. Kambalu is the exact size of Delhi, India, 28 million. Just to give you an idea of how big this city of Kambalu was. Has as many people as Delhi, India does modern day. So the elites and scientists want to talk about overpopulation of Earth right now because we have a city with 28 million people. Well, there was, we go back 800 years to the year 1200. We had cities this big back then, no problem. And also when they talk about their armies, they'll say they have an army of 500,000 men like it's nothing. And I could see why. There is a vast population in Tartaria, the size of Delhi, India, up here at Kambalu. And with the zoomed out view, here is Kambalu here. Definitely in the northeastern part of Tartaria. And here is Kambalu right here in the northeastern part of Tartaria, right next to Tenduk. Urbano Monte's map has Arzareth up here. And just a little bit south, we have Cathay, or Cathio. And in the middle of that, we've got the Kambalu region. And here is the huge city of Kambalu. Looks like it's on top of a river, or a river's going through the city. But very close, once again, to Arzareth. And the Jews have their holy city, Jerusalem. But that's only 2 of the 12 tribes. And the other 10 tribes of Israel have, they came up here to Arzareth. So if they were to have a holy city, it would certainly be Kambalu. This is the largest city in the area close to their home of Arzareth. And I've also heard theories that perhaps the original Jerusalem was in Moscow or, somewhere in Tartaria. Maybe the original Jerusalem was in Kambalu, or maybe this is the second Jerusalem, or at least the holy city of the lost 10 tribes. That's why when Marco Polo started describing the great city of Kambalu, and it says that it's a square, and each side of the square is 8 miles in length, and in Revelation there's the New Jerusalem. So there's a new holy city coming down out of heaven from God, and he measured it out like a square. It's as long as it is wide. So I was paying attention to the description here, and it's not quite an exact match. And it has a great high wall with 12 gates, with the 12 angels at the gates, and on the gates are written the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. And 3 gates on the east, 3 on the north, 3 on the south, and 3 on the west. So it says it has a second wall enclosing a square of 6 miles. It has 3 gates on the south, 3 on the north. Okay, but it doesn't have 3 on the west or 3 on the east. So I thought, okay, well, that can't be the right city. But it turns out this is the old city. And it says here, this is on the southern side of the new city. Okay, so I turn the page, and that's when we get the new city of Taidu, built near Kambalu. The city of Kambalu is situated near a large river in the province of Cathay. It was in ancient times eminently magnificent and royal. The name itself implies the city of the sovereign. The new and old cities are separated from each other only by the stream that runs between them. And the newly built city received the name Taidu, and all the Cathayans who were inhabitants of the old ancient city took their abode to the new one. Okay, so we have a new city, just like the Revelation talks about a New Jerusalem, and this one forms a perfect square, just like the New Jerusalem from Revelation. It's 24 miles in extent, with each side being 6 miles, and that doesn't seem to line up with the 12,000 stadia square that makes up the New Jerusalem. But it's hard to say if we know exactly what 12,000 stadia is. Just like the New Jerusalem, this is also enclosed with walls that are about 10 paces thick. And the whole plan of the city is regularly laid out by line. The streets are generally consequently so straight that when a person ascends over the wall on one of the gates and looks forward, he can see the gate on the opposite side of the city from him. So it has perfect geometry, and the allotments of ground throughout the city are square exactly in one line with each other, so as to resemble a chessboard, and planned out with a degree of precision and beauty impossible to describe. The wall of the city has 12 gates, 3 on each side of the square. And over each gate and compartment of the wall there is a handsome building, and every gate is guarded by 1,000 men. So 12 gates, 3 on each side. It's a perfect square. The New Jerusalem, the new city, has 12 gates, and there are 3 gates on the east, 3 on the north, 3 on the south, and 3 on the west. The city's laid out was a square as long as it is wide. So could this city of Taidu, which is at the same exact location of Kambalu, it sounds like the old city's on one side and the new city is on the other side. Could this new city be the New Jerusalem described in the book of Revelation? Is it possible that they may have put the names of the 12 tribes of Israel on each of their gates? A perfectly square new city with 3 gates on the north, south, east, and west. Coincidence? Maybe. Alright, so jumping back into the timeline where we left off with Trader Purvana. The year is 1264. Kublai Khan has passed the throne to Abaga Khan, and one of the Tartarians down in Turkey had rebelled against his brethren, his fellow Tartarians, and Abaga Khan went down to Turkey and has killed him. But King Abaga, having conquered Turkey and enriching his Tartars with the spoils of the rebellious Muslims, called the King of Armenia and offered him the kingdom of Turkey, in regard that his father and he had always been faithful to the Tartarians. But the King of Armenia, being discreet and wise, rendered great thanks to Abaga, but he said no, because he would be unable to govern 2 kingdoms at once. So the King of Armenia was worried that there was going to be a rebellion in Turkey by the Muslims, and so he didn't want to permit any Muslim to be in command there. And with this advice, Abaga accepted it, and he never allowed any Muslim to rule in Turkey. And the King of Armenia then asked him to think about delivering the Holy Land out of the hands of the pagans. And Abaga promised that he would with his best endeavor. So once Abaga had taken care of all these affairs in Turkey, he then returned to the kingdom of Khorasan, where he had left his family. And when the Tartarian king Abaga understood that all of this happened, he was ready to set forward with his power against the Muslims. But a certain Muslim, the son of the devil, came to the kingdom of Persia, prevailed by giving great gifts to some people who served near King Abaga, and by giving these gifts, King Abaga and his brother Mango were poisoned, both on the same day. They both died within 8 days afterwards. So died Abaga Khan in the year of the Lord 1282. After Abaga had been poisoned, the Tartars assembled themselves and ordained over them a brother of his called Tengodor. And in his youth he had received the sacrament of baptism, Christian baptism, but in his later years he kept the company of Muslims whom he loved, and he became a wicked Muslim, renouncing the Christian religion, and he would be called Muhammad Khan, and labored by all means to turn all the Tartarians to the irreligious sect of Islam, that son of iniquity. And the ones that he couldn't compel by violence, he allured by preferred treatment and rewards, inasmuch that in his time many of the Tartarians became professed Muslims, as they appear at this day. This evil child commanded that the churches of the Christians be destroyed and forbid them of any of their religious rites or ceremonies. He caused the doctrine of Islam to be publicly preached, the Christians to be banished, their churches in the city of Taurus utterly destroyed. He sent his messengers to the king of Egypt and concluded a peace with him, promising that all the Christians in his dominion will become Muslims or else lose their heads, which gave the Muslims cause for much rejoicing, and it made the Christians very sad. He then sent for the king of Armenia and Georgia, and to other Christian princes of those parts to come to him without delay. But they resolved rather to die in battle than to obey his commandment. And the Christians being now in such anguish and bitterness of heart that they rather desired to die than to live. Revelation chapter 9. During those days people will seek death, but will not find it. They will long to die, but death will elude them. But a brother of this Muhammad Khan and his nephew called Argon rebelled against Muhammad Khan, and they said, "You have forsaken the steps of our ancestors, and you have become a wicked Muslim, laboring with all your might to bring the rest of the Tartars to be Muslims also." And they told Muhammad Khan to reform his evil ways, otherwise they would proceed against him. And when Muhammad Khan had heard this, he proceeded with wrath, and he caused his brother to be slain, and he intended to do the same to his nephew. And he went against him with a mighty army, and Argon, being not of strength to withstand his forces, went back into a stronghold in the mountains. And that son of iniquity, Muhammad Khan, besieged him with a devilish army. Argon finally yielded himself with the condition that he might still enjoy his dignity and dominion. But Muhammad decided that he must be kept in prison, so he appointed an army, the constable, which he trusted so much, to put his nephew to death secretly and to bring him his head. So Muhammad Khan had captured this nephew Argon, and he said he was just going to put him in prison, but instead he secretly told his constable to behead him and to bring him his head. Now, one of those who had received the command of this bloody execution was a man of some place in authority, and he was brought up under Abaga, the father of Argon. So having compassion at Argon's distress, he took arms and in the night slew the constable of Muhammad and all of his followers. And then he freed Argon and made him lord and ruler of all. Argon, thus being freed, accompanied with his faithful followers, pursued after Muhammad, whom he overtook and seized before he came to Taurus, and he caused him, after their manner, to be cut asunder in the midst. And such was the end of the cursed Muhammad, before he had even sat 2 years in his seat. And when they say they caused him to be cut asunder in the midst, after the Tartarian manner, it's very likely that this Muhammad Khan was also eaten, because last time they had cut asunder in the midst a Tartarian captain, they also had eaten his meat. So once again, Argon has conquered Muhammad, and Christianity has won over Islam. And it seems at this point that the Tartarians, with Argon being the king, are once again a Christian nation. Marco Polo on the battle between Argon and Akomat. The next morning, Argon, having called his men to arms and drawing them up skillfully in order to battle, advanced towards the enemy, and Akomat, who was the Muslim, had done the same, and the two of the armies met and engaged without further parley. The battle began with a shower of arrows so thick that it seems like rain from heaven, that you might see everywhere the riders cast from their horses, and cries and groans of those who lay on the earth mortally wounded were dreadful to hear. When they had exhausted their arrows, they took their swords and clubs, and the battle became so fierce that the noise so great that you could hardly have heard God's thunder. The slaughter was great on both sides, but at last, though Argon himself displayed extraordinary valor and set an example to all his men, it was in vain, and fortune turned against him, and his men were compelled to flee, closely pursued by Akomat and his men, who made a great havoc of them. And in the flight Argon himself was captured, and upon which the pursuit was abandoned, and the victors returned to their camp and their tents glad beyond measure. Akomat caused his nephew Argon to be confined and closely guarded, and being a man given to his pleasures, he returned to his court to enjoy the society of the fair ladies who were there, leaving the command of the army to a chief, with strict orders to keep Argon closely guarded and to follow him to court by short marches as not to fatigue his men. And it happened that a great Tartar baron, who was of a great age, took pity on Argon and said to himself, "What great wickedness and disloyalty to hold their lord a prisoner," and he would do his best to set him free. He began persuading many of the other barons to adopt the same sentiment, and his personal influence on account of his age and known character for justice and wisdom was so great that he easily gained them over to his enterprise, and they promised to be directed by him. The name of the leader of this enterprise was Boga, and with his fellow conspirators they went to the tent where Argon was confined and told him that they repented for the part they had taken against him, and that in reparation of the error they had made, they had come to set him free and take them for their lord. And when Argon was set free, they started marching towards the court where Akomat was at in his principal palace, making great festivity. And a messenger came to him and said, "Sir, I bring you news, nothing good, but very evil. Know that the barons have delivered Argon and raised him to sovereignty, and have slain Soldan, your dear friend, and I assure you that they are hastingly hither to slay you." And when Akomat heard this, he at first was so overcome with astonishment and fear that he knew not what to do or say. So he told the messenger to mention to nobody the news, and he ordered his most trusty followers to arm up on their horses, and without telling anybody where they were going, they were going to try to escape and save his life. And after 6 days of fleeing, he came to a pass where he was arrested, and the keeper of that pass was a zealous partisan of Aragon, and he told him that all the treasure in the world would not hinder him from doing his duty towards his rightful lord. And he accordingly placed Akomat under strong guard and marching him to the court. And he arrived there in just 3 days after Argon had taken possession of it. So Argon had in the meantime taken control of the city, and he didn't find Akomat because Akomat had fled. But 3 days after he had captured the city, this keeper of the pass came back to the city with Akomat, and Akomat was delivered to him a prisoner. And without consulting anybody, Aragon ordered that one of his men slay his uncle and throw his body into such a place as it would never be seen again, which order was immediately executed. Thus ended the affair between Argon and his uncle Akomat. And with Argon being victorious over Muhammad, that brings an end to chapter 3 here. And the next chapter is chapter 4, which is starting off in the year of our Lord 1285. But those first 3 chapters cover about a 100-year period from Genghis Khan up to the year 1285. That's about a 100-year period. So this will be a great spot to end episode number 4. And I want to end with just one Bible verse out of Matthew chapter 24. And here it says, "For as the lightning comes from the east and shines even unto the west, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be." So it says that when Jesus comes back, it'll be as lightning coming out of the east and shining onto the west. And there's a few things that could be associated with lightning. One of them is speed. Lightning is very fast. And it also brings light. Of course, light is in the word itself, but it brings light, and it's very fast. It comes from the east and goes to the west. And that seems to be a pretty good match for the Tartarians, who had been sent east over the Euphrates River, and God had opened up a channel in the Euphrates River so they could pass into Arzareth. And he said in 4 Esdras, at the end of times, I will hold the water once again, and you'll be able to come back, of course, this time coming to the west. So when Genghis Khan spread out from his home of Arzareth into the rest of the world, overtaking Tartaria, all of Asia and Lower Asia, and the Tartars, which in the year 1228, under the command of Genghis Khan, overspread the earth like a flood, the successors of the 10 tribes of Israel. This overspreading the world like a flood seems to be something that happened very fast, such as lightning, and they also came from the east, and they shine onto the west, if you want to call it shining. They spread Christianity from the east in Arzareth and Tinduk onto the west, into the rest of Asia and Tartaria, even down into southern Asia and the entire earth. We find star forts, for example, in South America and all over the entire earth. So once again, thank you for watching. This has been a particularly long episode, and I'll see you guys in the next one.